No matter what country you are from, money is an inescapable part of political campaigns. But citizens have the right to know who is really funding their local candidates, influencing the results of elections. While many governments are becoming more transparent, information on party and campaign funding still remains depressingly opaque. Luckily, many activists are using technology to create tools to shine a light on the influence of money in politics and the misallocation of public funds. In Argentina, Poder Ciudadano collects information about election funding to republish it in an organized and searchable database. It has helped shine the light on political financing by corporations and propelled the law reform prohibiting corporate donations in Argentina. In the United States, the Sunlight Foundation collects and releases political contribution data so anyone can track influence by lawmaker, company, or prominent individual. Influence Explorer has been used by journalists in hundreds of investigative stories to connect the dots of influence by special interests and lobbyists. But often, political finance information is not available, so creative projects have sprung up to crowdsource information or connect the dots by using other available datasets. In Hungary, the local chapter of Transparency International organized a crowdsourcing campaign to monitor election spending. They compared the data to official reports and were able to show that parties had exceeded the legal spending limit and that these limits are hypocritical and unrealistic. Another Sunlight tool collects campaign fundraiser invitations and shows where politicians are campaigning and how special interests are buying access to candidates. These are just a few examples of how technology can expose where democracies need improving. But we need more tools like these in more countries. Learn more about Transparency International and Sunlight Foundation's work to create tools to uncover the influence of money in elections.
Good morning, Americas. Good afternoon, Africa and Europe. Good evening, Asia Pacific. On behalf of Transparency International, Sunlight Foundation and the International Anti-Corruption Conference, I would like to welcome all of you to the first webinar of our series, which is called Enhancing Transparency in Political Finance with Technology. The title of our first event is Political Finance in the Digital Age. How can accountability be enhanced by technology and open data? Now you can see the re-recording of the first webinar. Now I would like to introduce the speakers to you. First of all, I would like to introduce our speakers from Washington, from Sunlight Foundation. Hello Amy and hello Julia. Amy is the Partnerships and Training Director and Julia is the International Policy Manager at Sunlight Foundation. Hello.
Good morning. Good morning.
And we also have a colleague from Georgia, Transparency International Georgia, Matthias. Hello Matthias.
Hello.
Hi. And we also have another colleague from Georgia. Hello, Georgi.
Hello. Hi everyone. Good morning.
Thanks for joining from Georgia. And we also have Rosario from Argentina.
Hi everyone.
Hello. And we also have Bill Allison from Sunlight Foundation. He is going to join a little bit later. So, thank you for watching us and thank you for all the speakers for joining. And now I'd like to give the floor to our colleagues in Washington, to Sunlight Foundation. Julia?
Thanks, Peter. I wanted to start with saying that this is experimental for us too. Sunlight is doing a lot of webinars domestically, but this is basically our first international webinar, so we are really excited to have you all here. And the goal of this webinar is to explore how technology can be used to enhance government accountability and transparency, especially when it comes to uncovering the influence of money in elections, and the funding of political parties, which we basically call political finance transparency. The goal of this webinar series is to empower our fellow CSOs, civil society organizations, and think tanks in their watchdog roles, and to take a look at how technology is used in different circumstances and contexts. And while we think that a lot of governments are committing to openness through the OGP process, their open data policies, newer transparency laws, and freedom of information legislation, we also think that a very vital piece of the transparency agenda, namely money in politics and political finance transparency, remains depressingly opaque. Today, we're not going to talk about or deal with specific bans and limits. We're not trying to decide what kind of contributions are appropriate or try to distinguish between small donations and large donations. We won't try to identify different loopholes in political finance regulation or talk about enforcement of political finance laws. And we're not going to talk about these things not because we don't think they are important, but because we think that the first essential step in the reform agenda is transparency. And regardless of the end goals and what kind of reform agenda we're suggesting in the end, the first step is going to be transparency. So today we're going to talk about the different types of political finance data that is available, and in most cases it isn't available, how this data is disclosed and published in different countries and jurisdictions, and what we mean by open data, why openness matters. We're also going to talk about how this information can improve accountability by showing you some tools, some technology development that can be built of this data. And lastly, we will talk about the impact of having that kind of data available, the impact on investigative journalism. Again, this is a reminder that today's webinar is only the first part in a series that are built on top of each other. So if you click on the link, training.sunlightfoundation.com TI webinar, you'll find a video and the agenda for the other two webinars. And today, as I've said before, we're going to talk about data or tools that are built on data that is available in different countries. But what about situations, what about contexts where we don't have access to that data? And in most cases, we're talking about data that is unavailable or even unexisting. So our second webinar on March 11th will introduce some of the creative projects that either try to crowdsource the information or connect the dots by using other available data sets. In this second session, we will also touch base on innovative examples from national and local governments and introduce some helpful toolkits for the advocacy work of local organizations. And lastly, the final session, which is organized on April 14, will explore the different ways we can increase citizen awareness and participation and how we can inject political finance data into the life of everyday citizens, or how we can build an actual community around those data sets. This final session will also give us some space for a brainstorm, and we hope that many of you can join us for the whole webinar series. Before we get to the meat of this webinar, though, let's just very quickly clarify what we mean by political finance data. And we know that there's no such thing as a perfect definition for what we mean by transparency or money in politics, and it means something different in each jurisdiction. However, in order to get us all on the same page, we were thinking of the following definition. So when we talk about political finance data, we mean the financing of political parties, the expenditures of political parties, the financing of election campaigns, and the expenditure of elections. But of course, again, in most countries, and we will talk about this a little bit later, in most countries, those data sets are simply unavailable or non-existing. So what else might constitute as relevant data here? In the second webinar series, we're going to show you examples that use different data, and such data may include lobbyist reports, government contracts and procurements, state subsidies and other public funds, agricultural subsidies, company registry information, or NGO databases. And we're going to show you how that different kind of information can be used and what kind of tools can be built on that different data to be able to show the influence of money on the decision-making process. So how is political finance data disclosed throughout the world? Like I said before, the situation we think is pretty bad. And if we first take a look at the NIS assessment of Transparency International, the National Integrity System assessment, we know that in most European countries, political parties suffer from the lowest level of integrity. When it comes to actual data availability, the database of the international IDEA that catalogs political finance laws tells us that only half of the countries require reporting from both parties and candidates. And in more than 25% of the states that do so, there's just no requirement for this information to be made available to the public. And needless to say, online reporting or electronic reporting is not on the radar of even the most progressive countries. We also took a look at the OGP commitments, the commitments in the Open Government Partnership. And what we saw is that only 6 of the countries out of the 48 that we examined last year had any sort of hint around regulating the flow of money into politics. That again underlies our assumption that decision makers still don't really seem to associate governmental openness with the transparency of political funding. And there's a good reason why they don't. If you take a look at the global integrity scorecard and the map, the visualization of the effectiveness of laws that try to regulate political finance transparency, you'll also see that most of the surveyed countries in the recent report from Global Integrity perform really badly when it comes to regulating political finance transparency. And what is wrong with the data that is available or the data that is published? In most cases, it is not published at all. Or if it exists, it's not available to the public, only to a state audit office. It's incomplete, it's not detailed enough. Therefore, it is rather useless to the public and for oversight goals. Or it is published in bad quality and full of mistakes, or published in a very untimely fashion. And in many cases, when it is publicly available, complete, or published in timely manner, it is just not accessible in ways that allows for research or analyzing the data sets. And right now, this is the point when I give the floor to my colleague, Amy, who will talk about open data, openness, and some of the tools that Sunlight has built around data that is available in the United States. Thank you. Thank you, Julia. And as you were saying, I'm going to talk a little bit more about open versus closed data. And some of these formats you see here on the screen are going to be pretty familiar to you. But sort of the hallmark of the difference between an open data format and a proprietary one is that the open data formats are open. They are machine readable. The common qualities are as searchable, as sortable, and also you don't need to purchase any software or anything to just start using it. You can pretty much start manipulating the data right then and there. And by doing that, it really lowers the threshold of entry to understanding and using the information. So it's really important that while it is familiar for a lot of folks that there are PDF formats and whatnot, a lot of times if you do not have Adobe or other formats on your computer, it's difficult to just start using the information. So in addition to the open and closed data, just the format itself, there are a couple more hallmarks of what it means for it to be open, for data to be open. So the data should be online. And that is a big change now because we're doing webinars online. A lot of information now can be made available online. And then additionally, as Julia said earlier, it really needs to be complete. So completed information is important because you can see the full story. And primary, so it comes from the source. And then additionally, to being online, it should also be in real time. because a lot of times, especially in the space where we care about elections, for instance, if you have information that comes in right after the elections, a lot of times, for example, political finance data, it really could have made a difference in terms of how people are voting. So it's really important that we stress that information, especially open data, should be made online and in a real-time format. And then lastly, to make the data even more accessible, it should be available as an API if it's possible. So API stands for Application Programming Interface. And here at Sunlight, we actually make a number of our data sets available as APIs. Here you should be able to see it now. So the API, it just pretty much means it's a format that developers and technologists can utilize it and take that information and implement it and integrate it into different programs and tools. So we have a variety of different data sets here in the US that we've aggregated and standardized and put it in a way that is now additionally useful for other developers to take and build upon the tools. So you see here, one of the APIs that we have is called the Influence Explorer API. And that's actually the data that powers one of our tools called influenceexplorer.com. Influence Explorer is a tool that we have. It helps connect the public and private influence data. And a really big, an important element of Influence Explorer is that we're able to not just use government information, but also aggregate information from various resources. And they're all listed here. And you can read more about our data sets at the About page in Influence Explorer. And what the tool also allows you to do is to search for people and organizations and politicians and industries, and you can set it by cycles and also download the data. As I was saying, you can download the data, and this is just an example of how you're able to do that. And I think the most important part is actually to just start exploring the tool and showing how it actually works. So here is the tool Influence Explorer, and it's really easy to get started. You can just actually type in a company or an individual into the search box here. So I would just start with Exxon. And there are a number of different entities that populate, and that's because oftentimes large companies can file under different names and entities. So we're looking for ExxonMobil here. And what you can see is we have a number of different data sets available. So here we start with the campaign finance, and you can see we're looking at all years. And you can see the employees of the company who they support, and their top recipients, as well as the top PAC recipients, state versus federal. And we also have lobbying information as well, in addition to regulations. And here in the US, we do require a number of information to be disclosed on lobbying, on regulatory information, on contracts. But a lot of times that information is not easily accessible. And that's one of the main impetus as to why we decided to build this tool, to really aggregate the different data sets together and really help tell that story of the role of the companies and individuals. And after every single one of these data sets, you can also download the data, as I was saying earlier. So what this does is giving you a quick sample of what is the items that are being aggregated for those tallies. And then you can also just simply download this, and this will download as a CSV onto your computer. And as I said earlier, you can also search for individuals. So you see here, I just searched for President Obama. And the reason why there are more than one entities for Barack Obama is because he was also a state representative before entering the Senate and before being president. So you see here, there's information, campaign finance data on Obama. And then once again, you can also download this information for him, or you can change the period in which you're interested at looking at the campaign finance data. and it just changed for us right now, as you can see here. And for the different periods, there's also additional information. So what we are trying to do is also archive the view from 2011 to 2012 with independent expenditure data and other information as well. So this is just an example of how in the United States we do the campaign finance portal in terms of aggregating the information on the federal and state level. So now I'm going to turn this over to Matthias in Georgia, which he'll talk a little bit more about their experience.
I wanted to briefly discuss the work of TI Georgia together with my colleague Georgi Chanturia, who is here with me. I wanted to talk a little bit about our work that we have been doing over the past few years. So in Georgia, we are in the very fortunate situation that we have a number of open data sets available online at this point. We have fairly good party financing data now in a pretty good format. We have government contracting data. We have basically all government spending available online for all government entities across the country. We have a free company registry with free shareholder information so we can find out online who owns what company. We also have a very extensive requirement for public officials to file asset declarations. So we know which companies are owned by public officials or high-level civil servants and how much they derive in income from different sources. We also have an online land registry, and we have an online voter registry where everybody can check if they're properly registered and where they're registered to vote. TI Georgia started working on party financing in 2008. And at the time, the party financing data in Georgia was pretty bad. It was available online, but it was all scanned letters that the parties had sent to the state audit office, and then somebody put them online, but there was no consistency, and the data format was really not very useful. So what we first started doing is that we transcribed the data. That was the only way to put it to any use. And we also started going out and checking if some of the data was correct. So we randomly selected a number of the donors that were disclosed and tracked down their addresses to see if the people really lived there, if they had really donated to the party. And in a number of cases, we found that the data was correct, but in a number of other cases, we found that the people didn't live there, that the people who allegedly had donated to the ruling party didn't know anything about their donation, or in some cases, they were even socially vulnerable families, so households that were very poor, and that certainly didn't have the finances to donate to the ruling party. So we found that the data was online, but actually somebody had put down other people to hide who the real donors were. Then in 2012, our work had gotten more sophisticated. We had started scraping the company registry database in Georgia. And at the time, and until now, it was banned for political contributions from companies, and legal entities were banned. So only individuals are allowed to donate to political parties. So what we started doing is we looked at the individuals that were disclosed as having donated, and we went through the company registry and matched them with companies that they were shareholders of, or directors, or legal representatives of, in order to give the public a better sense which companies were contributing to parties, either to have some influence over the party, but in most cases actually the government was coercing or having some leverage over companies to contribute to a political campaign. More recently, we had a presidential election in 2013, and we now are really actually able, based on public data only, to trace the money. So we found one donation to the presidential candidate of the ruling party to the Georgian Dream campaign that was made by Tengiz Gvazava. About 50,000 Georgian lari, which is approximately 20,000 euros. So we found by looking at the company registry that he was the director of Elita Burgi, a Georgian company. By looking at the contracting data, we then found that this company had in the same year gotten some contracts from the Ministry of Internal Affairs. And then we started looking further, and we found that the company in Georgia is owned by an offshore shell entity in the British Virgin Islands called Ringgold Finance. In order to track down who owns that shell entity, we looked at what other assets, basically what other companies does Ringgold Finance own in Georgia, and we found it owns Horizont Ltd. And this Horizont Ltd. in the land registry in Georgia, we found owns a piece of land where the Prime Minister's private residence was located in Tbilisi. So basically, we were able to link this entity to the Prime Minister at the time. We were able to show that this company had gotten a non-competitive contract, so there was no tender. It had gotten contracts from the Ministry of Internal Affairs, which showed us a very bad culture or practice in terms of public contracting.
There are lots of publicly available databases in Georgia, but the real trick is to making them interconnect with each other. For that we use the process called scraping. Basically, the problem is that all of the databases are accessible via web formats, web platforms which are custom developed by each individual agency. Well, this is a problem because then what became a problem that we need to design a tool that will work with each of those databases and not work with individually themselves, because in that way we will need to create custom scripts for each individual database, and then that might cost too much and be very time consuming. Personally, I'm basically a fan of using as simplest tools as possible, and usually those simple tools are very much universal and they can be adapted to each individual database. Lately, I have been using iMacros, which is free, available to online. It's a plugin for the Firefox browser, and basically Microsoft Office spreadsheets and the formulas and with a bit of web developer knowledge. That's basically all that. The data researcher needed at the time. Well, the main point of our report and our research was we're interested in the companies that were owned by political party donors and whether these companies received any simplified, direct, non-competitive procurement contracts by the state, and if the donation date was somehow correlated with the date of the actual contract, where the contract was signed. And I'm going to demonstrate now one of those cases that we researched, and here it is. For this research, we used several databases and we interconnected them with each other. We used political party donor database by State Audit Office and the company ownership database, which has been scraped by us, and we created a separate tool for that. Let's start exploring this example. For example, we have a person here, Sergei Sanakoev. We have his personal ID in the State Audit Office database, and by this database, he has donated 13,500 Georgian laris, which is about 10,000 US dollars, on 17th of August 2012 to United National Movement. Then we took this information, specifically the personal ID, and put that in our company ownership database. And we discovered that Sergei Sanakoev, this person, owns 25% of the LLC called Orient Logic. And he owns that with three other persons, which is Vitaly Jakinov, Vasha Naskidashvili, Alexander Koevi, and each of those persons own 25% of this company. And next, we took this information about these people and went back to the donor database. We're interested if any of those persons have actually donated to the party. And it turned out that each of those persons have donated 30,500, the identical amount, on approximately the same date, give or take 3 or 4 days. And naturally, this already we were suspicious about these donations because the sum seems a bit odd, and there's the correlation with the dates. We took this information to the non-competitive procurement database, which basically contains all the simplified procurement contracts that are done by any state agency from 2010 December. And what we discovered was that this company has received several contracts both before and after this donation date. The contracts are 122,000, 51,000, 63,000, 129,000, and so on. So, and each of this, and again, the dates of these contracts when the contract was signed were very closely correlated to the actual donation date. We discovered that basically 2/3 of the companies that were owned by the party donors have received non-competitive procurement contracts. We discovered that with our research, and interestingly, the donations were on average comprised 4.1% of the total value of non-competitive contracts awarded by the state to those companies. This is how we used several and recently connected several public databases to achieve these results. Thank you.
As you said, my name is Rosario and I am part of Poder Ciudadano, which is the Argentine chapter of Transparency International. And I'm here to present you dineripolitica.org, which is our online platform to show all the information related to political financing. As Julia said in her introduction, we are presenting here databases from experiences where the information is available. We have the information available, but it is not presented in a friendly or easy way for citizens or journalists. So we have created this online database which aggregates all the political financing data from 23 different provincial databases and tracks more than 700 political parties. The problem is, you may see on the first image on the screen, that each report is presented as a PDF, which contains a lot of information which is not open. So, what we had to do with this database is to collect all those PDFs, which are around 500 for each electoral process, and create a software to take all that information and present it in an easier way, as you may see on the second image. So what we were able to do with this database is to provide journalists and scholars and citizens in general an easy and friendly tool to track all the information related to financing. For example, you can easily go into the database and enter your name to see if you appear there as a donor. And we have had some surprises with that tool, because many people who hadn't donated to any political party found themselves there. And we had even discovered some people who didn't have incomes to donate, whose names were being used as donors for political campaigns. Some of their findings we have had with this tool are about donations from different mafia to the political campaign, for example, of the president in 2011. We also have some curious findings, for example, that the national director who coordinates the electoral process is a donor to the electoral campaign of our current president. We also have some non-desired impacts. In 2009, the Congress passed a reform to the political financing law, for which corporations can no longer donate to political campaigns. This, which seemed to be an advance in the first moment, which what really makes is to make darker the process of the nations, because we are pretty much sure that corporations are still donating to the campaigns, but we can track that relation now because the donations are hidden behind names, for example, of employees of that company. I also wanted to highlight some obstacles we have while trying to work with this platform. We don't have an access to information law, so we could get access to more information if the judiciary branch was incorporated into a national law of information. There are some very old habits from the judiciary branch that we're trying to change. For example, they only give us the information in a PDF format. We have had many meetings asking them to give us an open format, but they still think that the PDF is more secure. So this is our main obstacle, because it makes all the process slower and more expensive. We are having a very big obstacle nowadays, that is that we need to reprocess all the information from 2013, and with this closed format, it is very expensive for us to do that, so we are still waiting for some funding to complete the platform.
Sure. My background is investigative journalism. I worked for the Philadelphia Inquirer for a couple of years and learned the trade from a couple of investigative reporters there named Barlett and Steele, and then I worked for the Center for Public Integrity on domestic and international projects. And I'm campaign finance data and political influence data is information that I consistently come back to, and the reason is that when you're reporting in the real world and you see things like the slide that we're showing, the why this is important, this is a provision that's it's actually the third time some language like this has been inserted into a bill, and it basically funds a program run by the Department of Defense to buy something called Global Hawks, which are these surveillance aircraft. It's a multi-billion-dollar program, and it's basically telling the U.S. Air Force that they have to use the money that was appropriated for this purpose to buy this particular weapon system. That seems a little bit odd, and why would they be putting this language into bills? Well, the reason is that the Air Force really does not like this particular weapon system. It has trouble flying. I mean, I did a story about how it has trouble flying in bad weather. If there's a thunderstorm, these things are grounded. These are basically surveillance, eye in the sky type things. And and here's the General Michael Hostage in charge of these things, and he says, I now have a high altitude ISR, that's intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance fleet that is not very useful in a contested environment, which means that instead of having U-2 planes which fly, they're a Cold War system, they're bought and paid for, and can fly in battle zone or whatever, we're going to be buying Global Hawks that are slow, fly low to the ground, and anybody with a surface-to-air missile can shoot them down. And and basically there's only enough money in the Pentagon budget to fund one or the other of these things. So Lockheed Martin, which built the U-2 spy plane, isn't getting any money from this anymore. So why are we buying this very expensive weapon system? Well, if you take a look at the campaign finance data, what you see is this incredible press by Northrop Grumman, the company that makes this drone. They spent in 2013, which is not an election year, their PAC had already contributed by the end of the year more than $1.6 million. They fanned out 236 members of the House they gave contributions to. That's a majority of the members in the House. They gave to 62 senators. There's 100 senators, either to them or their to committees they have. And these are campaign contributions that are given to members of Congress, and they don't just reflect, it's not as if Northrop Grumman's PAC is writing these checks and then putting them in the mail and that's the last they think of it. These are contacts between the company and these lawmakers, and they're trying to influence these lawmakers to support their particular project, which will mean tens of billions of dollars over the course of its life for Northrop Grumman, even though this particular weapon system is not wanted by the Air Force, and they prefer something that, I mean, generally speaking, the Pentagon loves to spend money. These guys don't want to spend this money, which to me is really significant. And so, and how do you explain it? Well, one of the first places you look is the campaign finance data. And generally speaking, I mean, I think we find this just about everywhere where there's, political parties and money, that there's the potential for corruption, there's the potential for influence, there's the potential for taxpayer money to be misallocated and put into projects that may not be as good as they should be. It's not just scandal that we're looking at. There's opportunity costs. And again, in the case of the Northrop Grumman drone, they only have money for one weapon system. It's either going to be the U-2 or the drone that doesn't work as well as the U-2, and they're stuck with the drone because of Congress's pressure. Congress obviously has the force of law. And I think you find these things internationally. So, there's a few campaign finance scandals that, from around the world. And I know when we were doing, I was one of the original editors on the Global Integrity Project that the Center for Public Integrity launched back in, I can't remember what year that was. I think it was 2004. When we looked at these different countries, there's old-fashioned bribery where you're giving to somebody personally, but in kind of especially the more developed democracies, this is how the influence plays out, going through political parties or to politicians. And this is why it's so important for journalists to have this data.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you for all the speakers. Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Matthias. And thank you, Georgi. Thank you, Rosario and Bill. And a big thank to all the participants who joined us, joined the webinar or watched this recording. A very special thanks to Sunlight Foundation, all the colleagues of Sunlight Foundation who put this webinar together. Next month we will talk about how can the transparency of political finance be enhanced when we don't have reliable government data. Very often political finance information is not available, so creative projects have sprung up to crowdsource information or connect the dots by using other available data sets. You can register on the website of Sunlight Foundation, Transparency International, or the International Anti-Corruption Conference. So join us on 11th of March. Take care and see you soon.